From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. U.S. sanctions 600 Russian targets since start of war in Ukraine. French court annuls decision to close Al-FAROUK Mosque. Chinese Foreign Minister, Russian envoy, visit Kabul. Indian Muslim activist recounts 2 painful years in jail. Coalition calls on Biden to lower drug prices. Minneapolis City Council recognizes Ramadan. Our top stories tonight. Over 400 Russian elites, including members of the government and defense companies, face sanctions from the US, the European Union, and G7 countries. So far, 600 Russian targets have been sanctioned by the US due to Moscow's war on Ukraine, according to a White House statement. These economic sanctions on Russia are unprecedented. In no other circumstances has the US moved so swiftly and in such a coordinated fashion to impose devastating costs on any other country, said the statement. The Ukraine-Russia war, which began February 24th, has displaced more than 10 million Ukrainians. Roughly 3.7 million people are seeking refuge in neighboring countries, the UN agency reports. On Thursday, a human rights organization decried Israel's policy of placing Palestinian children 14 years and younger under house arrest. The Beirut-based Palestinian Association for Human Rights, known as Shahid, said Israeli authorities continue to oppress Palestinians, especially residents of Jerusalem. Shahid said Israeli policy of house arrest aims to reduce the number of children in prison to preserve its alleged democratic image before the international community. Palestinian children are confined to their homes or that of a family member with ankle monitors to track their movement. Data compiled by prisoners' rights groups shows that 500 to 700 Palestinian children are detained annually by Israeli forces, with about 130 children under house arrest. A French court Wednesday voided the government's decision to close a mosque near the city of Bordeaux for 6 months, Anadolu news agency reports. Sefen Ruiz, attorney for the Al-FAROUK Mosque Association, said that the Bordeaux Administrative Court annulled the Gironde Governorate's March 14th decision. Al-FAROUK Mosque was closed for allegedly defending radical Islam and spreading Salafist ideology. In August, France's highest constitutional authority approved a controversial anti-separatism law that was criticized for singling out Muslims. The legislation was passed by the National Assembly in July, despite strong opposition from rightist and leftist lawmakers. On Thursday, the Iranian Foreign Ministry called for launching an intra-Yemeni dialogue away from foreign interference to settle that nation's crisis. Yemen is facing the worst humanitarian catastrophe of the century, a ministry statement said. This was on the occasion of the 7th anniversary of the Saudi-led coalition's war and blockade. Iran's ministry also said it supports any initiative for the removal of the blockade, establishment of truce, and the beginning of intra-Yemeni negotiations. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, has invited Yemeni parties for talks in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, on March 29th. This will be to discuss comprehensive peace in the country. The Yemeni government welcomed the invitation. However, the Houthi government said any dialogue must be held in a neutral country. China's Foreign Minister Yang Yi paid a surprise visit to Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, yesterday. This is his first visit since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan last August. Political, economic, transit, and investment issues are the main topics for Yi's visit. A Russian delegation also arrived in Kabul to discuss a range of issues with Afghan officials. Yi met with the first Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar and Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs Amir Khan Muttaqi. Most countries have taken a wait-and-see approach to the Taliban's interim government. but Yi's visit sent a positive message, officials said. It came a day after Yi attended the Foreign Ministers' Summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, hosted by neighboring Pakistan. Lawyer and activist Ishrat Jahan was released from jail in India's capital, New Delhi, last week after more than 2 years of imprisonment. She was hugged by her sister, and the duo burst into tears as the relatives gathered around to welcome her home. Jahan said she was subjected to extra surveillance as well as periods of solitary confinement while imprisoned. The 31-year-old was arrested along with dozens of other Muslims in February 2020. This was during mass protests against a controversial citizenship law. The Citizenship Amendment Act was passed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government in December 2019. It allowed only non-Muslim migrants and refugees from neighboring countries to secure Indian citizenship if they arrived in India before December 2014. Together with a proposed National Register of Citizens, many activists fear the two measures were aimed at disenfranchising India's Muslim minority. Bringing domestic news stories after the break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
On Thursday, a progressive coalition urged the Biden administration to exercise its power to make life-saving medicines affordable. Advocates for the Make Meds Affordable campaign unveiled a roadmap for lowering drug prices. It outlines 2 executive authorities the federal government can invoke to end patent monopolies and lower drug prices. Republicans and a handful of big pharma-funded Democrats have undermined congressional efforts to rein in skyrocketing drug prices. According to the Progressive Coalition's plan, the agency could act without the need for Congress to intervene. Julia Santos, Senior Healthcare Policy Manager for Indivisible, said there's nothing reasonable about sky-high profits that pharmaceutical companies enjoy at the expense of taxpayers. On Wednesday, a group of Senate Democrats urged President Joe Biden to boost production of fossil fuel-reducing technologies like heat pumps. The move could also slash dependence on Russia and other authoritarian petrostates while addressing the climate emergency, they said. The demand was delivered in a letter to Biden signed by Senate Democrats. They wrote that Biden can ramp up manufacturing of clean energy technologies through the Defense Production Act or Defense Security Cooperation Agency. Lawmakers encouraged the president to examine all possible routes to support and deploy clean energy and energy-efficient electric technologies. This would reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuel by the US and Europe and Moscow's economic reliance on those exports. A man suspected of killing a maintenance worker at the Husseini Islamic Center in Sanford, Florida, on Thursday is in the hospital after being shot several times by deputies. Seminole County Sheriff Dennis Lemma initially said that the suspect, 38-year-old Ahmad Razlan, and the victim, an unnamed 59-year-old man, were co-workers at the center. Investigators later determined that the two were strangers. Authorities believe Razlan broke into the center Thursday morning, found and confronted the worker, and then beat him to death. The victim's body was found on the mosque's porch, with most of his clothes removed and strewed around the area, Lemma said. The American Civil Liberties Union is suing the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, to stop its agents from singling out Muslims for religious questioning. The lawsuit was filed this week on behalf of 3 Muslims, Abdi Rahman Aden Kariya, Muhammad Mosley, and Hamim Shah. The ACLU is seeking a court order barring CBP from asking its clients about their religious beliefs, practices, and associations. The civil rights group said CBP's targeting of Muslims violates the U.S. Constitution. Muslims have a constitutional right to equally practice under the law and cannot be singled out for differential treatment, the group said. It added that the Constitution guarantees all people the right to practice their religion in peace and privacy, free from unwarranted government scrutiny. On Thursday, the Minneapolis City Council unanimously adopted a resolution recognizing the month of Ramadan. The resolution also allows the public broadcast of the adhan and the Islamic call to prayer during daytime hours year-round, a first in the city's history. Minneapolis Ward 6 Council member Jamal Usman presented the resolution. Usman said it's a wonderful honor for the city to recognize Ramadan and acknowledge the call to prayer that can be broadcasted in Minneapolis. The head of a Muslim civil rights organization is endorsing the Chicago Cubs owner's bid for the Chelsea Football Club despite past Islamophobic comments. Ahmed Rehab, executive director of the Chicago branch of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, is defending Cubs chairman Tom Ricketts. The Ricketts family's bid for a UK soccer franchise has run into stiff opposition due to Islamophobic comments made by its patriarch, Joe Ricketts, in 2019. In a number of leaked emails, Joe Ricketts labeled Muslims as an enemy and said he's considering having a book written called Islam, Religion, or Cult. The senior Ricketts made other racially insensitive remarks as well. Rehab said he doesn't think it's fair for the family's offer to be imperiled by the actions of one family member. At the time of the leak, Tom Ricketts denounced the statements. He also noted that his father was not involved in the operations of the Chicago Cubs outside of owning a portion of them. A man suspected of burglarizing the Davis Islamic Center in California was caught stealing Wednesday morning, police said. Davis police was called to the mosque for a burglary in progress. Officers at the scene surrounded the center, creating a perimeter before the suspect could leave. A live camera feed from the center allowed officers to watch the suspect get into a lockbox and fish out some cash, police said. Officers detained the man once he left the scene. The man, identified as 47-year-old Ashraf Hijaz, now faces charges of burglary and possession of burglary tools. Police said Hijaz had cash and a crowbar in his possession. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear. Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson for U.S. Supreme Court, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Hena. Greatly appreciated. And now we'd like to discuss another bit of important news that came up this week, and that was the Senate confirmation hearing for Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is President Biden's nominee to replace Justice Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court. As you all may know, if Judge Jackson is confirmed, she would be the first African-American woman to ever serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. To discuss the historic nature of her nomination, the hearing that happened over the past week, and some of the drama that occurred in that hearing, we'd like to bring on a very special guest, Professor Marjorie Cohn, who is the Professor Emerita of the Thomas Jefferson School of Law and also a former president of the National Lawyers Guild. Professor Cohn, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. So, you obviously are quite aware of the historic nature of this nomination. Can you tell us first your personal reaction to the nomination? Then we'll talk in detail about the hearing, her professional background, and what impact she might have on the court.
Yes, it's an historic nomination. She is the first Black woman ever to be nominated to the Supreme Court. And she also is the first former public defender ever to be nominated to the court. And if she does get confirmed, she and Justice Sotomayor will be the only two former trial judges on the court. So she brings a unique background and experience, but there is no nominee in the history of the Supreme Court better qualified than Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was a judge at both the trial and appellate level in the federal system. She went to Harvard Law School. She was vice chair of the Sentencing Commission. She has handwritten hundreds and hundreds of opinions, and it's unanimous that her qualifications are exceptional. And that's why the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee didn't attack her qualifications. They made up what I think were racist attacks on her to try to distract people from her qualifications and try to agitate and rile their radical right-wing Republican base.
Professor, let me ask you this. So you noted that, she would be the first former public defender to serve on the bench. And you noted her wide breadth of experience and, of course, the attacks that were made on her. How do you think that unique professional experience that she has might impact the court, might enhance the way the court makes decisions, considers cases? What could be the possible practical impact of that unique professional background, not to mention the personal life experience, of course?
Well, the court deals with a number of criminal cases. In fact, much of the Supreme Court docket is made up of criminal cases. And there have been former prosecutors and corporate lawyers. In fact, Justice Sotomayor, who happens to be the most progressive justice right now on the court, was a former prosecutor. But having a former defense attorney gives an appellate judge a perspective that is so important, because at the trial level, a defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and it's the prosecutor's burden. It's not like they're equal. Now, once the defendant is convicted, then there is a presumption that the defendant is guilty because the defendant has been convicted or pled guilty. But having that experience and insight into criminal defendants is critical. And one of the things that Judge Jackson was famous for is when she handles criminal cases and does criminal sentencing, she always talks directly to the defendant to explain to the defendant the ramifications on other people of his or her conduct. And she affords criminal defendants respect, which many people do not. And looks at them as individuals instead of just as criminals. So I think her experience as a public defender will be invaluable and unique, and will help greatly with her judging when she joins the Supreme Court.
Now, Professor, as you noted, she was attacked by some of the Republican senators on the committee. And in addition to stuff about her sentencing of child sex offenders, they focused in part on her work as a defense attorney representing Guantanamo Bay inmates. And that was somewhat strange because usually the people that lawyers choose to represent, especially when they're public defenders, is not held against them. It's kind of considered a bad faith argument. What did you think of those attacks on her based on her work for Guantanamo Bay inmates? And also, if you can comment on the attacks on her related to her sentencing of certain defendants.
Yes, I thought those attacks were outrageous. John Adams, I think, was the second president of the United States. He was a defense attorney before he became president. And he said that nothing made him prouder than his representation of British soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre. It is the duty of a criminal defense attorney to defend clients. And when you're a public defender, you don't choose your cases. They come in to you. In 2004, the Supreme Court decided in Rasul versus Bush that detainees at Guantanamo had the right, the constitutional right, to file petitions for habeas corpus to challenge their detention as enemy combatants. And in 2005, Judge Jackson became a deputy public defender, an assistant public defender in Washington, D.C. And she and her colleagues were assigned some of these cases, and they filed 4 petitions for writ of habeas corpus challenging the detention of their clients, the indefinite detention of their clients. And keep in mind, most of the people detained at Guantanamo most of them were never convicted of anything or even charged with anything. Many of them were picked up for bounty, by the U.S. military, turned over to the U.S. military for monetary bounty. And so she and her colleagues filed petitions for writ of habeas corpus. And in those petitions, they alleged that the U.S. military and the CIA were committing war crimes because torture is a war crime. Under our law, under international law, torture is a war crime. And they named as defendants George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and other officials. And so 2 senators during the confirmation hearing, John Cornyn and Lindsey Graham, attacked her for calling George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld war criminals. Well, she never called them war criminals. One of the causes of action was war crimes for torture. And it's required when you prepare a petition for writ of habeas corpus that you identify by name the responsible officials. And then once Obama came into power, that transferred to him. He became the defendant. But they got a lot of mileage, red meat thrown to their Republican base when they said, oh, you called our officials war criminals. Now, if you want to know my personal opinion, they are war criminals. I've written books about this, and certainly they and other people who participated in this torture and ordered the torture were war criminals. But she never put in the petition the words war criminals. What the petition alleged is that the officials, including Bush and Rumsfeld at the time, ordered or condoned the commission of torture, which constitutes a war crime. And so it's, you have to sift through a lot of the theatrics and the real hostility and nastiness. And I would say racism on the part of these Republicans who were playing to their right-wing base. And many of their talking points reflected the QAnon conspiracy theory. QAnon is an organization that many people in QAnon, and I don't know, maybe all of them, think that Washington and the media are controlled by a satanic cabal of pedophiles. And so this leads into your second question about her sentencing. Josh Hawley, who was one of the senators, signaled ahead of time through a tweet that he was going to attack Judge Jackson's sentencing of people who were convicted of viewing or receiving child pornography. And he picked out about 8 cases, and he looked at the sentence that was recommended by the sentencing guidelines, what the prosecutor recommended, and then said, and the judge gave a lower sentence. Not at all figuring in what the defense argued, what the probation officer recommended, which is always very, very persuasive with judges, or the specific facts of the case, the defendant, his or her prior record, etc. But they seized upon these cases and made it look like she actually accused her of being in favor of pedophiles. Now, this has been thoroughly debunked by the New York Times, even the National Review, which doesn't support her candidacy, her nomination, said that these charges were misleading and outrageous. But again, they're throwing red meat to their base for looking for toward re-election campaigns. And it looks like, it seems that all the Democrats will support her, so she will be confirmed. But these right-wing senators were likely trying to peel off two of the conservative Democrats, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Now, today, Friday, Joe Manchin came out and said he is going to support her nomination. It's very possible and hopeful that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, two Republican senators, will also support her nomination. Less than a year ago, Judge Jackson was confirmed by the same Senate Judiciary Committee she went through, with the support of Collins, Murkowski, and Lindsey Graham, although Lindsey Graham, who really looked like he was unhinged and hysterical and just outrageous, is setting the stage for voting against her, playing to his base. So it looks like she'll be confirmed, but I think that these racist and sexist attacks that they mounted on her were directed at that purpose, and she was remarkably unflappable. She answered with grace and with dignity, and she was just a model of someone who has exquisite judicial temperament and should actually sit on the Supreme Court. And I think that if she is confirmed, which she in all likelihood will be, that she and Justice Sotomayor will make an incredible team, a progressive team. And even though the ideological balance of the Supreme Court will not change 6-3 in favor of the right wingers, will still be 6-3. The fact that we will have two extremely progressive justices, in addition to Kagan, who's a liberal, I think could help to move the court, shift the court, the balance of the court in certain cases.
Well, Professor, I'm glad you got into detail of debunking some of the things that were said. I mean, I watched that part of the hearing where the war crime issue came up, and I know some people said, oh, wait a minute, isn't torture a war crime? If she called them war criminals, wouldn't that be accurate? But as you noted, she didn't even say that. She just said that torture is a war crime. The U.S. government approved war crimes, and obviously she filed suit against the people who were the defendants and also the people who were responsible for that conduct. So thank you for going into that detail. Last question, Professor, as we look ahead. So assuming that Judge Jackson is confirmed, you mentioned a bit about the ideological balance of the court not changing. One of the interesting things I thought that came up is when a few senators on the Republican side got into substance with her. I remember Ben Sass went into a bit of a long back and forth about her judicial methodology, her views on originalism. And, she almost seemed to be partial to the idea. She seemed to indicate that is the way the court currently interprets cases, is through that lens of originalism. And she didn't express opposition to it at all, but she obviously seemed to have her own take on that. What are your thoughts on her judicial methodology? What do you expect her perspective to be? Because she didn't seem to fit into either the Scalia mold, certainly, but she also didn't seem to embrace and say, well, I'm just like Justice Breyer. What are your thoughts on what her methodology or philosophy might be as she's interpreting cases?
I think she was masterful in actually not being able to be pigeonholed into a certain judicial philosophy. She said that on the Court of Appeals and on the district court when she was a trial judge, it wasn't really relevant whether she was an originalist or not. And she said that her methodology is she looks at the text of the statute or the Constitution. She looks at the original intent. What was the public perception of that particular constitutional provision when the Constitution was written, and many times that doesn't end the inquiry, because many of the provisions in the Constitution are very short. There's a few words. They need interpretation. So then she looks at other things the context and historical considerations and current considerations. And so she very, very cleverly, I thought, avoided being pigeonholed into being an anti-originalist. And it is true that most of the justices now on the Supreme Court are so-called originalists, but that doesn't mean that even if she were an originalist, she would not be free to apply the particular constitutional or statutory provision in light of what's happening today. They didn't have cell phones, for example, at the time of the founding, and now they do. And so is that a search and seizure if the police look at your data on your cell phone? Well, she said that at the time of the founding, they said the Fourth Amendment says that people shall be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures of their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And she said going through your papers is like going through your cell phone. So she drew that analogy. So she is going to be her own person. She is not going to be pigeonholed into being labeled as having a certain philosophy. And I think once she gets confirmed, and I think she will be, she is going to be a terrific justice, one of the best we've ever had. And I was just delighted with her nomination and with her incredible patience and dignity and that she exhibited during these vicious, racist, sexist attacks that these right-wing Republicans mounted against her at the hearing.
It was certainly quite a hearing to watch, and I can't imagine what it was like to experience it being in that hot seat. But that is over, and now we look forward to seeing what will come next in terms of the vote, and then expected her service on the Supreme Court. Thank you, Professor, for giving us some insight into what we saw over the past week and what we might be seeing in the coming weeks and years, God willing. We greatly appreciate your perspective today, and we hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you so much, Edward. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. And Hena, we'll toss it back to you.
Thank you so much, Edward. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.